Hello. So in this video, I want to talk about data frames in R. Data frames, the idea of a data frame is kind of like a spreadsheet. It's data that has both columns and rows, and the different records are on the different rows, and then the columns represent the different types of data that you might have about each of those rows or records. So here's an example where the different rows are, say, customers, and then the columns are different attributes or properties of the customers. So, for example, the first column here is name, and we've just given the names of the customers by their first name here. So James is one customer. His age is 23, he's a student, and his favorite color is red. So these are all columns or properties of each record, and then the rows are the different records. So Sally is the second record. She's 43, she's not a student, and her favorite color is green. So its data frame is very much like a spreadsheet, because this is the kind of data you might find in a spreadsheet. And this is the way you would usually organize it in a spreadsheet, with the different rows being different records and then the columns being the different fields or attributes or properties. So at any rate, in R, that's what data frames will look like. Now, notice that each column will have a particular data type to it. So, for example, name here would be a string or a character data type. And then age could be an integer type, but probably would be numeric. So age is a numeric data type. And then is student would be a logical or a Boolean. True and false are the only two values for that. So all the values are true and false in that column. And then for favorite color, that again would probably be a string or character. All right, so how do we make these types of objects in R? Here's the code down here that allows you to make one of these data frames. The first thing you have to do, we set up here that the different columns have all the same data type, and so it makes sense to record the columns as a vector, because vectors must have all the same data type as well too. And so each of the columns is going to be a vector in R. And then we'll put together the data frame by kind of putting together the columns all into one object. So that's how we'll do things here. So the first vector we create is the names, and it starts with James, and then Sally, and Rupert, Octavia, and Belinda. And then the second vector here is age, and that's 23, 43, 19, and so on. And notice how each of the vectors here has to have the same length, and that's because the length of the column vector that we're going to use here is exactly the number of records that we have. So here we have 5 records, and so each of these vectors has to have length 5. Then the is student column is going to be true, false, true, true, false, and the favorite color column is going to be red, green, blue, yellow, orange. So the name is a vector of characters or strings. The age is a numeric vector. Is student is a logical vector, and fav color is a character vector. So finally, when we put these all together in the data frame, they look like this. You just say data.frame, and this is the function that makes a data frame for you. And inside of here, you put the names of the columns, or the names of the variables that hold the different columns, and you put them into the order that you want. If you want name first and then age, you put them in this order. If you wanted some other order, you would rearrange these variables the way you put them in here as arguments to data.frame. So then you give your data frame a name, so it's going to be, this is a variable customers that I'm setting equal to the data frame that gets created from this function over here. And then the last thing I'm going to use here is an argument that says strings as factors equal to false. And that just ensures that when it creates, or it sees a vector that's just strings or characters like this, it doesn't try to make it into a factor. Sometimes you want that to be true and sometimes not. So you'll see this argument strings as factor means false. Otherwise, when R creates this data frame, it will sometimes try to make these character arrays into factors, which is not always the thing you want to happen. So let's run this cell and see what happens. So nothing happens, right? Because we didn't output anything. So we'll output some stuff down here. So we went ahead and probably created our data frame. Let's see. Let's check the length of all of our vectors up here. They're all length 5. And if the lengths of some of these vectors you're using as columns are not 5 or different from 5, or you have different lengths, it'll complain and it won't create this data frame at this point right here. So there's the length of each of these. What does the structure of the data frame look like? Okay, so let's see. When I create a data frame, I know I have a bunch of rows and a bunch of columns. So how does R report that information to me? So here it says the data frame is 5 observations of 4 variables. So let's see if we can make sense of that. 5 observations would be, I think, the different rows here. And then the 4 variables would be the 4 different columns for each record. Okay, so if it's 5 observations of 4 variables, that means there's 5 records and 4 different properties or attributes or columns. All right, the first one is called name, and it says that's a character vector, and here's the first few values of the vector. It doesn't always give very many of these. If your data frame is big, you will only see just a few of the very first values, probably up at the very top of the data frame, I want to say. Yeah, so the first few. And then the next column here is age, and that's a numeric. And that the values here's this one, it happens to fit in all 5 values, and I think so these are small enough. And then the next column is student, and that's a logical, so that's a Boolean type, and then here's the first few values of that. And finally, favorite color is a character type or string type, and it's red, green, blue, and so on. So did I run that? Yeah. So there's the output of that. There's a nice function called head in R, which will show you the first few rows of a data frame. If your data frame doesn't have very many rows like ours does, it'll show all of them. And it prints out some information as well, too. It tells me the name field, the name column is a character, the age column is a double. This is interesting. It reports it a little bit different from numeric, but double is a type of numeric. Is student is a logical, and it's abbreviated that to just LGL, and then favorite color is a character. And here it gives me these down here as well too. It also numbers them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I think head will print out the first 5 rows in the database. So it's usually used only if you need to see just the first few rows in the data frame, just to check to see if it looks correct. So if we do try to create a data frame with the wrong number, one of the columns has the wrong number of elements in it, it will complain, and you can see what it does here. It says arguments apply different number of rows. So that's a problem here. This vector is trying to create something with 5 rows, and this one's trying to fill in the data for just 2 rows. So it complains about that, and it won't actually create a new data frame for that situation. So it turns out there's various ways to refer to the rows and the columns in a data frame, and we'll see a couple of simple ones here. Each of the columns actually has a way to refer to it. You can say customers, so you can say the data frame variable name, customers, and then use a $, and then the name of the field or the column. So if the first column here was named, then customers and then $ name, that should refer to the first column of data. So that's going to refer to this vector of characters here. So let's see what this prints out when we run this. Good. So it's just printing out the values in that column. So there they are, the first 5 values. How about age? If we look at the age column and try to print that out, what does that look like? It's just the 5 values that are in that numeric array. vector, I mean. And then you can remove a column of data by just setting it equal to null. Right, so suppose I have a bunch of columns here. So here they are. And I want to get rid of one of them. Say I want to get rid of the favorite color column. How can I do that? Once I have the data frame already set up, I've done something to it, and then maybe I want to change it and drop that column out of my data. So just say customers $fav color, and that refers to that column, and just set it equal to null. And if you set it equal to null, then that'll drop it from the data frame. So now let's print out information about the data frame through str and see what it does. So now it's saying it's 5 observations of 3 variables. So remember, that means that it still has 5 rows, but now it only has 3 columns since it dropped this last column over here. Okay, so it says 5 observations of 3 variables, and then it lists out the different columns, their types, and also the first few values in the column. So in the same way that you can drop a column from a data frame, you can also add a column to a data frame. You have to make sure that the vector that you use has the right number of rows to it, or the right number of elements to it to match the number of rows in the data frame. But for example, this one, if we wanted to add a column called favorite music, we could. Here's the string values or the character values for the different records. And then if I just say customers $fav music, that should refer to that column. And I set it equal to this vector up here, which we defined on the line before. And now let's print out the structure of that one. So now it says it's 5 observations of 4 variables. So it's gone ahead and placed this column right here, the favorite music, at the end of the data frame. And so now if I print this out, I won't see the same kind of thing as we saw before. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and print it out as well too. So what if we go ahead and print it out like this? Let's run that whole cell again. So this time, there's the new data frame. It looks like this. And you can see that it's entered that last column over here and put in the favorite music type for each of the records that I had. Finally, you can summarize the data from a data frame. So you have different vectors here that have data in them, and say you wanted to summarize each of those vectors, their type, their mean, that kind of thing. Could you do it? You can. The summary function will, when applied to a data frame, will just print out information about each of those fields. So the name field, it tells you the length of it, what kind of class it is, and that kind of thing. Over here for age, because this is a numeric vector, it actually prints out some summary statistics for it. So there's the mean of the data. Here's the min and the max and the median and some other things, the quartiles as well too, I guess. And then over here is student. Summarizes what it knows about his student. It's a logical, so Boolean. 2 of them are false and 3 of them are true. So that's what it says or summarizes about that vector of Booleans or logicals. And then for the favorite music, it just tells you it's the character type, and the length of it is 5. So that's some summary statistics that you can always print out from a data frame, and it will just basically summarize and do descriptive statistics on each of the columns separately. You can refer to items in the data frame by using indices. So here's an example: customers square bracket and then 2, 3, and then close square bracket. That'll go to the second row and the third column and pick out the element from there. So before we even run this, let's go to the second row and what is it? The third column? The third column. So here's the second row and here's the third column. So I think that should print out the value false when I run that. Yep. And then let's take the first few rows of the customer data frame, and I think we kind of already did that up above. There they are, and here we can just check that the second and third, that's false, like that. Suppose we do 4, 1, so that's the 4th row in the first column, so come down here. I think that should be just a string Octavia, so let's do that, and then it looks good. There's a way to print out the entire second row of of the data. So that looks like this. You put in a 2 here and then a comma and then leave it blank in the second entry here. And if you do that, that's what that looks like. That's just the second row. How about if we try to print out I'm going to insert a, whoops, not a text one, a code cell in here. And I want to look at the columns as well. So customers, and then put a square bracket, open square bracket, and then leave it blank, but let's put in and print out, see if we can print out the third column that way. So let's do it like that. Yep, there's the complete third column, just all the true and falses in that column. And then finally, let's print out the data frame again, just so we can check, yeah, true, false, true, true, false. So it looks like it printed out the third column just fine. If you want to actually set a value in the database, so say you find one in the data frame, if you find one entry that is incorrect, you could set it, like maybe Sally's, or let's say Rupert's name was incorrect and he's really 20 years old. Let's see if we can fix that. So put in a code cell down here. So let's say customers. And now how do I refer to that's the third row and the second column. So I'm going to say third row and second column. And I want to change that value. So I'm actually going to set it this way. So the element in the third row and the second column I'm going to assign to be the new value and say the new value is 21. So really Rupert was 21 and we had his name wrong. So now let's see, let's go ahead and print out the customer's data frame in total and just see if it's done the right thing. Yeah, so up here Rupert's age was 19. And then after we ran this line right here, it set Rupert's age to 21. So it's updated just that one value in the database, data frame. All right, so that's some basics for data frames. Creating them out of vectors, and then referring to the different columns, checking the number of rows or the number of records, and then also ensuring that we're able to access particular elements in the data frame.